1738. Westminster. A ship's captain walks into a committee room of the British Parliament, carrying a small jar. Members of Parliament lean forward. He opens it. Inside is a human ear. His own ear, cut off his own head 7 years earlier by a Spanish Coast Guard officer in the Caribbean. 1 year later, Britain declares war on Spain. That war will last 9 years, spread across 3 continents, and kill somewhere around 25,000 people. Over an ear in a jar. And here's the thing, that doesn't even make the top 2 in this video. Today we have 6. A pot of soup, a stray dog, an ear, a plate of pastries, a 38-minute war, and a wooden stool nobody was allowed to sit on. 6 real wars, 6 real causes, after which you want to close the history book and never open it again. After each war, I'm giving it a score on the stupidity scale from 1 to 10. By the end of this video, that scale breaks. That's not a promise, that's a spoiler. Let's warm up. Late 18th century, and as usual, nobody in Europe can leave anybody alone. The northern Netherlands have kept the River Scheldt closed for 200 years, which means the ports of Antwerp and Ghent, belonging to the Habsburgs, are completely cut off from the sea. Amsterdam gets rich off this. The southern cities get poor. 200 years. Generations are born, live and die staring at their own empty harbours, because at some point the neighbours upriver said this is shut. And shut it stayed. Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, eventually got tired of it. He demanded the Scheldt be opened. The Dutch politely declined. Joseph did not find the politeness convincing and sent 3 ships up the river, including the flagship Le Louis, flying the imperial standard. The plan was presumably this. We turn up, we look intimidating, they get scared. Very 18th century. Bigger ship means you're right. The Dutch, however, had not read the script and were not planning to be scared. Against the entire imperial squadron, they sent 1 ship. 1. It was called the Dauphine. What happens next, I'm going to tell you slowly, because the first time through, your brain refuses to process it. The Dauphine approaches the imperial squadron, aims a cannon, fires. Once. The ball goes over the deck of Le Louis and hits a pot of soup. The soup spills across the planks. Nobody is hurt, not 1 scratch. The only casualty is the crew's lunch, and Le Louis raises the white flag. I'm not joking. The flagship of the Holy Roman Empire, with cannons, with a crew, with the imperial standard flying, surrenders after a direct hit on a piece of kitchen equipment. The whole squadron turns around and sails home. Apparently the soup was so good that losing it counted as an unrecoverable loss. Or the crew worked out that if the Dutch can hit a saucepan with the first shot, the second one lands somewhere less replaceable. Joseph II, on hearing all this, declared an actual war. His troops crossed into Dutch territory, destroyed a customs house, and flooded an entire region by breaking the dikes. Then France told everyone to calm down, and a peace treaty was signed in 1785. The Scheldt stayed closed. But the Dutch had to pay several million guilders. So they won and got billed anyway. Familiar, isn't it? Roughly like a service charge on a flat. You didn't do anything and the invoice arrives regardless. Stupidity scale. 1 shot, 1 saucepan, 0 deaths. I'm giving it 5 out of 10. I know that sounds generous, but I'm saving points. You'll understand why shortly. Fine, the soup was cozy. Nobody died. Unless you count the lunch. Enjoy that feeling, because from here, people start dying, and the reasons only get dumber. 1925. The border between Greece and Bulgaria. These two have hated each other since the Balkan Wars, so about 12 years. The border is studded with posts. The soldiers are on edge, fingers near triggers. Any small thing can become a pretext. Now picture a specific scene. A Greek border guard is standing at his post. Next to him is a dog. Not a working dog, not a tracker, just a mongrel that had somehow attached itself to the soldier. A dog which, like every dog on this planet, has precisely no understanding of visa regimes, international law, or red lines on maps. At some point, the mutt notices something interesting on the Bulgarian side. Maybe a cat, maybe a smell, maybe another dog. And off it goes, across the border. The soldier runs after it. No hostile intent, no invasion plan, no awareness that he has just crossed a state frontier with a rifle on his shoulder. Just a bloke who wants his dog back. The Bulgarian sentry sees an armed Greek running across Bulgarian soil. There's no time to think it through. Shot. The Greek goes down. And be honest, in his position, with that training and that border, what would you have done? And this is where the normal story ends and something unhinged begins. Instead of an inquiry, instead of a note of protest, instead of the basic, let's at least establish what happened, Greece mobilizes the army. 20,000 men cross the border. They occupy several villages. They position artillery outside the town of Petrich. They prepare to shell residential districts. One dead border guard, and within days, guns are aimed at a town. Sit with that ratio for a moment. Historians still argue about whether the incident was an accident or a planned provocation. Historians have clearly never owned a dog. The League of Nations stepped in and, for the first time in its otherwise fairly useless existence, worked exactly as designed. Greece was forced to withdraw and pay reparations. But 50 people were already dead. 50. Because a dog saw something interesting. And the dog was never found. It triggered an international crisis involving artillery and occupation, and then simply wandered off. The most effective diplomatic provocateur in history, and it had no idea it was provoking. Stupidity scale. A dog, 1 dead soldier, 20,000 mobilized, 50 dead. 7 out of 10. And the soup, with its 5 points, is starting to look overpaid. Let's call it 4. At least only the lunch suffered. Remember how this video started? Westminster, a captain, a jar. Let me tell you the whole thing, because it turns into one of the most spectacular disasters in British military history. 1731, the Caribbean. Spain and Britain have a treaty that lets British ships trade in Spanish-American ports under very tight limits. In practice, British merchants smuggle constantly, and Spain patrols the water with Coast Guard vessels that board British ships and search them. Both sides are entirely convinced they're the wronged party. Both sides are roughly half right, which is the most dangerous ratio there is. A British merchant captain named Robert Jenkins is boarded off Havana by a Spanish Coast Guard officer named Julio Leon Fandino. What happened next depends on who's telling it. Jenkins said they tied him to a mast, accused him of smuggling, and Fandino sliced off his left ear and told him to take it to his king, and that if the king were there, he'd get the same. Jenkins sailed home and complained. Nothing happened. For 7 years, nothing happened. Hold that number because it's the whole point of this story. And then British politics needed him. The opposition wanted a war with Spain, partly over trade, partly because war is a marvelous way to make the sitting Prime Minister look weak. In 1738, Jenkins was summoned to a parliamentary committee, and this is where the legend and the record part company. So let me be straight with you. The story that he produced the ear in a jar and waved it at Parliament is repeated everywhere, and there's no solid contemporary evidence that it happened that way. It appears in accounts written decades later. What's not in doubt is that a man's missing ear became a national political argument, and that the country went to war over it in 1739. Even the name came later. A historian coined the phrase War of Jenkins Ear about a century after the fact, and it stuck, because of course it did. Now the good part. Britain decided to hit Spain where it actually hurt, in the Caribbean. Admiral Edward Vernon assembled one of the largest amphibious forces ever put to sea up to that point. Something like 27,000 men and nearly 200 ships. The target was Cartagena de Indias, on the coast of modern Colombia, the treasure port of the Spanish Empire. So far, this is a normal, competent, extremely well-funded military operation. Enjoy it while it lasts. And Britain was so confident of victory that they struck the commemorative medals in advance. I want you to sit with that. Before the battle. They minted medals showing the Spanish commander kneeling in surrender to Vernon. Some of them carried a caption about Spanish pride being humbled by Admiral Vernon. They made several different designs. One says the pride of Spain humbled by Admiral Vernon. Another says true British heroes took Cartagena. One of them has the date stamped on it, the 1st of April. I want you to imagine signing off on that purchase order. Britain manufactured the souvenirs of a victory that had not happened yet, involving a surrender that had not been offered by a man who was still alive and holding the city. The man holding the city was Blas de Lezo, and you need to know what he looked like, because it matters. By this point in his career, Lezo had lost his left leg to a cannonball, lost his left eye to a shell splinter, and lost the use of his right arm. He had roughly 3,000 regular troops and a few hundred militia against 27,000. Look at those numbers again, and then remember that somebody had already paid for the medals. The siege lasted about 2 months. Lezo gave ground slowly, fort by fort, forcing the British to spend weeks on each one. He sank his own ships in the harbour channel to block it. The British assault on the main fortress went in at night with scaling ladders that turned out to be too short for the walls. And the whole time, in the swamps around the city, the real killer was working. Yellow fever and dysentery went through the British camp and the crowded ships like fire through dry grass. Nobody wins a siege against a mosquito. The British withdrew. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 14 and 20,000 men died, the overwhelming majority of them from disease rather than Spanish fire. It's one of the worst defeats in British naval history, and for a long time it was quietly not talked about very much. You can probably guess why. The medals, of course, already existed, thousands of them sitting in drawers across Britain, celebrating a surrender that never occurred. You can buy one today. Collectors love them. They are, as far as I can tell, the single most premature object ever mass-produced by a European government. And there's a footnote that I find genuinely hard to believe. One of the officers who sailed with Vernon on an earlier operation was a young Virginian named Lawrence Washington. He admired his commander enormously. He went home and named the family estate after him, Mount Vernon, which he later left to his younger half-brother, George. So the home of the first president of the United States is named after the commander of history's most premature victory medal. History does not write like this. History writes like this all the time and nobody believes it. And then you look it up yourself and there it is. And what did all of it achieve? Nothing. The war dragged on for 9 years, folded into the wider war of the Austrian succession, and ended with essentially nothing changing. Around 25,000 people dead. And the ear, wherever it actually ended up, was never mentioned in the peace terms. Stupidity scale. 7 years of nobody caring. Then a war on demand for domestic politics. Medals minted before the battle. Ladders too short for the walls. 18,000 dead, mostly to mosquitoes. 8 out of 10. By the way, any word on the dog? No, still nothing. Now imagine that instead of an ear, which is at least attached to a person, the cause of a war is a plate of pastries. And that along the way, a general loses a leg. And that leg goes on to have a more eventful afterlife than most people of his era had lives. 1821. Mexico wins independence from Spain and immediately collapses into chaos. 20 presidents in the first 20 years, about one a year. They changed faster than managers at a struggling football club. Against that backdrop, the whole country is coming apart. Foreigners lose their businesses. Shops burn. Nobody pays compensation. Keep that last bit in mind. It becomes the whole story. In 1828, riots break out in Mexico City. 5,000 people wreck the district with the expensive shops. Among those affected is a French pastry chef named Remontel. Mexican officers, he claimed, burst into his shop, smashed everything to pieces, and ate all the pastries. All of them. Remontel demanded compensation, 60,000 pesos. The entire shop was worth less than 1,000. That's roughly like demanding the price of a house for a broken flower pot. The Mexican government looked at the number and ignored it. Remontel wrote to Paris. Paris ignored him too. At this point, you would drop it. I would drop it. Everyone reasonable drops it. And here begins the part I'm actually telling this story for. Any normal person in Remontel's position writes off the loss and opens a new shop. But Remontel was not a normal person. Remontel was a Frenchman whose baking had been stolen. He wrote complaints. No answer. He wrote more. No answer. He wrote to different departments. Also no answer. 10 years. For 10 years, this man knocked on every door that existed. Mexico ignored him. France ignored him. The entire world ignored him. With that kind of persistence, he should have gone into tax collection. And in 1838, his decade-long crusade about croissants finally landed on the desk of King Louis Philippe. France issued Mexico an ultimatum: 600,000 pesos. By now, that wasn't just the pastries. It was every accumulated claim by French citizens, plus interest, plus everything anyone could think to add over 10 years. Mexico replied, to paraphrase, that the till was empty and they could go to hell. France went. Not to hell, but to Veracruz. Admiral Bourdin blockaded the entire Gulf Coast from the Yucatan to the Rio Grande. He took the fortress. He occupied the city. Mexico declared war on France. Look at where we are. A war that began with a pastry chef complaining about stolen baked goods. Historians call it the Pastry War. I did not make that up. And now, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna walks onto the stage. If you don't know who that is, here's the short version. This is the man who lost Texas, was living in disgrace on his ranch, and whom the whole of Mexico considered a catastrophe. But when France invaded, he crawled out of retirement and announced he would save the country. Santa Anna led the counterattack at Veracruz, personally, in the front rank. And in the fighting, French grape shot hit him in the left leg below the knee. The leg was amputated. And from this moment begins the part that is hardest to believe. I need you fully present for this. Santa Anna had his leg buried with full military honors. Cannon salutes, solemn speeches, a procession. For a leg. Separately from the rest of him. You have been to funerals with less ceremony than this leg got. And the maneuver worked flawlessly. He went from national embarrassment to a hero who had given a limb for his country almost overnight. No image consultant of the 21st century could have done it better. It continues. When he became president again, Santa Anna had the leg exhumed from Veracruz, transported to the capital in a state carriage, and reburied in a mausoleum with a fresh round of salutes, poetry, and formal addresses. The leg traveled between cities in a carriage of its own. It had better organized transport logistics than most Mexicans of the period. Does that sound like a country with its priorities in order? And in 1844, Santa Anna was overthrown again. A crowd stormed the cemetery, dug up his leg, tied it to a rope, and dragged it through the streets of the capital. And that was that. 2 ceremonial funerals and 1 dragging along the cobbles. That leg had a more turbulent biography than most living people. This isn't history anymore. It's a season of a show that got cancelled for being implausible. The war ended in March 1839. The British helped broker the peace. Mexico agreed to pay 600,000 pesos. Remontel got his money. 10 years. 10 years he fought for his pastries, and he won. Mexico never paid the full amount, mind you, and that became one of the pretexts for a second French intervention 20 years later. So uneaten croissants haunted Mexico for another half-century. Stupidity scale. The most persistent pastry chef in history. 10 years of complaints. A fleet dispatched over baked goods. A leg with 3 funerals. 9 out of 10. Any word on the dog? Nothing. We're still looking. Stop. Hold on. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, right, 9 out of 10. Where exactly is there left to go? I thought that too. And then I read about Zanzibar. The 27th of August, 1896. The island of Zanzibar off the coast of East Africa. Britain has an arrangement with the Sultan. Britain effectively picks who rules. The Sultan dies suddenly, and his cousin, Khalid bin Baugash, moves into the palace and declares himself Sultan without asking Britain first. Britain issues an ultimatum. Leave the palace and lower your flag by 9 in the morning. Khalid does not leave. He barricades himself in the palace with somewhere around 2,500 men, most of them servants, civilians and palace guards, some artillery pieces of considerable antiquity and 1 royal yacht. At 9 in the morning, precisely, nothing happens, because Khalid has not surrendered. Imagine the silence on those decks. At 2 minutes past 9, the Royal Navy opens fire. 3 cruisers and 2 gunboats, at close range against a wooden palace. The palace begins to disintegrate almost immediately. Khalid's artillery is destroyed in the opening minutes. The royal yacht fires back, using among other things a machine gun that Queen Victoria had personally given the Sultan as a gift, which is one of the more British sentences I have ever had to say out loud. It is sunk. The flag comes down, either shot away or lowered, depending on who's telling it. At around 9:40, the shooting stops. Check how long you have been watching this video. That is roughly the entire conflict. 38 minutes. That is the entire war. Sources put it anywhere between 38 and 45, depending on where you start the clock, which tells you something about how seriously anyone was taking the bookkeeping. Either way, it is the shortest war in recorded history. Somewhere around 500 people on the Zanzibari side were killed or wounded, almost all of them in a burning wooden building they could not get out of. On the British side, 1 sailor was injured. Khalid escaped out of the back of the palace and got to the German consulate. And now the detail that takes this from tragic farce into something else entirely. Afterwards, Khalid's captured supporters were made to pay reparations covering the cost of the bombardment. 300,000 rupees, calculated to include the 500 shells and the 4,000 machine gun rounds fired at them. They were invoiced for the ammunition used against them. I have read that sentence several times, and it does not improve. Stupidity scale. A war shorter than a lunch break. An ultimatum with a deadline like a parking ticket. 500 casualties in 38 minutes. 1 injured sailor on the other side, and then a bill for the ammunition. 10 out of 10. The scale is broken. There will be no more scores. And now, the last one. And here, I want to say something. Everything so far has been, at bottom, funny. Saucepans, ears, legs and carriages. A war that took less time than a haircut. We laughed. It was fine. This one is different. It starts like a comedy and ends in a way that stops being funny. And it shows you what happens when an absurd pretext lands on top of something real. 1900. The Ashanti Kingdom in what is now Ghana. The Ashanti have been a serious power in West Africa for 2 centuries. They have fought the British 4 times already. Britain has now annexed the territory and exiled the king. And at the center of Ashanti identity, there is an object. The golden stool. According to tradition, it descended from the sky and holds the soul of the entire nation. Not a symbol of the soul, the soul. It is never allowed to touch the ground. It has its own attendants. Nobody sits on it. Not the way you would not sit on a nice chair. Nobody, ever, at all. Not commoners, not chiefs, not the king. When a new king is enthroned, he is lord over it and raised again without making contact. In several centuries, no human being has ever sat on that stool. In March 1900, the British governor of the Gold Coast, Frederick Hodgson, called an assembly of Ashanti leaders and gave a speech. In it, he asked why the golden stool had not been brought out for him. He said that as the representative of the Queen, he was the ruler now, and he asked why he was not sitting on the stool at that moment. Read that again. He did not know what it was. Nobody had told him, or he had not listened. He genuinely believed it was a throne. He stood in front of the leadership of a proud nation and asked, essentially, why he wasn't sitting on their stool. The Ashanti leaders said nothing. They sat through the rest of the speech in silence. They went home, and they went to war. What else was anyone going to do? The uprising was led by Ya Asantewa, the Queen Mother of Ejisu, a woman in her 60s. According to the tradition, when the chiefs hesitated, she told them that if the men would not go forward, then the women would. And she would call on her fellow women, and they would fight until the last of them fell. Then she picked up a rifle. And they were not a small uprising you can wave away. They besieged the British fort at Kumasi for months. The garrison ran out of food. A relief column had to fight its way through. When the British finally broke the rebellion, they brought in thousands of troops. Around 2,000 Ashanti died. About 1,000 British and Allied troops died. 3,000 people, over a question nobody needed to ask. Ya Asantewa was captured and exiled to the Seychelles, where she died. The kingdom was formally annexed. And they never found the stool. The Ashanti had buried it in the forest. The British searched for years. It was eventually dug up in the 1920s by people looking for gold, not by the government. And after a scandal, it was returned. It still exists. It is still not sat on. Think about that. It outlasted the empire that went looking for it. I'm not giving this one a score. There's nothing to score here. A saucepan can be refilled. An ear cannot be reattached, but a man lived without it. A leg can be buried a third time. 2,000 people cannot be given back. And none of it needed to happen. Because a man in a hat did not ask one question before he opened his mouth. 6 wars. From a soup pot to a graveyard. Every one of them started with something ridiculous. But it's never about the ear, or the dog, or the pastries, or the furniture. It's about people looking for a reason, and they always find one. The golden stool is still in Ghana, and still unoccupied. Santa Anna's leg is somewhere in Mexico. The Cartagena medals sit in museum cases in Madrid and Greenwich, celebrating a victory that never happened. And George Washington's house is still named after the man they were made for. And that dog was never found. If you happen to run into a mongrel with no papers on the Bulgarian border, let me know. We've been looking for 100 years.
Down this broken road, carried by the Lord. The sea seems the lights are low, and I have nowhere to go. I watch the shadows spin through. I don't know what I'm looking for, but though the great sea is sparse, I try to touch the burning sun, and though the time is moving fast,